All right, let's talk about our third history lesson. Last week we did a reading project. Every week we'll do kind of some different things as we go along. Some will be videos, some will be reading that way, kind of a mixture of things as we go. This week we're going to talk about inventions and advances in agriculture. Be sure you have your notes that I attached to the portal so that you can fill in the blanks, because these notes are going to be part of your grade. You're going to turn this in, and we'll go from there. So if you don't have your notes yet, I attached them on the portal, and let me know if you couldn't get them. So pull those out, keep up with this as we go. Let's talk about Alexander Graham Bell first. So right now we're going to sort of talk about some great American inventors. Alexander Graham Bell sort of revolutionized American life during what we call the Age of Industry. He is most known for his invention of the telephone. He invented it in 1876. His first successful transmission of intelligible speech over a telephone was really accidentally. He was preparing a test for the transmitter. He spilled battery acid on his clothes. He called to his assistant, whose name was Thomas Watson. He was in the next room. He said, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you." Watson failed to hear Bell directly, but he heard the voice over the transmitter. So somehow, I have no idea how telephones work. I understand how it's supposed to work, but I am not smart enough to figure that out. But somehow that accidental spill resulted in his telephone working. Now, he took his telephone to this thing called the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Now, this Centennial Exposition happened in 1876. Now, this was the centennial celebration of independence, and they hosted this big exposition. It was really the World's Fair in Philadelphia. President Grant was the one who sort of presided over the ceremonies. It covered 236 acres. There were 167 different buildings, featuring displays from almost I think about 40 different nations. Exotic sights included things like beehives from England, stuffed crocodiles from Egypt. There was even a pagoda from China. And I think there were about 10 million people who visited the World's Fair. It's kind of funny because we have a calculator, right? But one of the biggest draws that year to the fair was the calculating machine. Now here's the thing. This calculator, this machine that did calculations for people, covered 15 square feet of space. So anyway, this was Alexander Graham Bell, most famous for the telephone in 1876, and the world got a chance to see it at the Centennial Exposition. All right, this guy is Thomas Edison, and most of us have heard of Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison is considered the greatest inventor in history. His contributions to modern living are huge. He established what we call the first modern scientific laboratory. It was located in Menlo Park, New Jersey. Reality is, Edison himself never claimed to be a great scientist. He was a technological genius. He had these amazing skills in putting scientific principles together. So when I was in college and I took physics and I took chemistry, I was phenomenal in the bookwork. I would ace, it's math-based science, and I could ace anything put in front of me. I would walk into the lab and I would have to convert this book knowledge to practical usage, and I would fail terribly. Edison could take these scientific practices and he could put them to practical use. He patented around 1,093 inventions, including the phonograph, motion picture projector, the mimeograph machine. He improved the telephone system. So Bell sort of started that, but Edison took it and improved it. He improved the telegraph system. Again, it was already in place, but he began to take this and with his practical thinking began to improve it. Now listen, we typically say he invented the light bulb. That's not exactly true. He created this thing called the incandescent electric light bulb. This light bulb is considered to have had the most profound effect in the 20th century. Having lights in your house changed everything. I watched this show called Downton Abbey. I'm not recommending it. It's my stupid show that I watch and love. And in one of the first episodes of this show, they have installed electric light. And because for years, the only way you had light was to light a candle. The head kitchen lady, the cook, she's a cook, is terrified of the light bulbs because she is assuming it is like a little flame in there, and she's terrified that she's going to burn the whole house down. So when this light bulb was invented, it took a while for people to fully understand, but it really, really did change everything. You should have a blank on your sheet that I attached to the portal. These are the questions. You have blank spaces. Here are your questions that you need to answer. So you should have these in your notes we just covered. Pause the video, answer these 5 questions in that handout, and then push play and keep listening. All right, let's talk about some advancement in agriculture. So as time is progressing, there's a statement that says necessity is the mother of invention, that as you are working super hard and you have these needs, these necessities, that your brain automatically goes to, well, some people's brains, goes to ways to make that easier. And so as agriculture becomes larger and larger, we end up with these inventions coming out to attempt to make life easier. And therefore, we end up with this increased production. We have this thing called the chilled iron plow. It's invented by a man named James Oliver. A twine binder that you go through, and it's helping to pick up and bind your crops. This thing called the combine steam tractors changes everything. Instead of having a horse pulling things, you now have a steam tractor. Then that progresses to gasoline and diesel tractors. You have this thing called crop rotation. Now, crop rotation is very, very important. And actually, it was one of the laws that God put in place in Exodus, in the book of the laws, that you should have a field that is clear every year. And so what happens as you're planting plants, you have this idea of crop rotation, that you're rotating crops in your land because certain crops absorb certain minerals, certain crops deposit certain minerals. And if you are constantly rotating which crops are growing in which plot, you are going to have an increased production. The idea of fertilizer becomes big during this time period. And this thing called the Burbank potato. And this is a new variety of potato that is sort of formulated during this time period that, again, adds to agriculture. All right, this guy's name is George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver is one of the greatest contributors to the advancement of American agriculture. He was born into slavery in Missouri on a guy's farm whose name was Moses Carver. Even as a young kid, Carver had this massive interest in plants. Even as a kid, he had this nickname of the plant doctor. And a lot of times after the Civil War ended, the slaves were freed. A number of slaves ended up staying with the plantations or the farms they were working on and became kind of a hired hand. And that's what Carver did, he remained with his former master after the Civil War. He taught himself to read, and then he enrolled in a freedman's school to continue his education. Ultimately, he graduates from college. He worked as a launderer, as a cook, as a janitor to help pay his expenses for college. He was like very much a self-made man who genuinely came from nothing. He ultimately earns his degree. And I don't understand this at all, but during college, he started collecting fungi, which eventually resulted in 20,000 species and brought him this professional fame amongst his colleagues. In 1896, he befriends a guy named Booker T. Washington at some point, and Booker T. Washington hires him at a place called Tuskegee Institution. Ultimately, George Washington Carver finds, you don't invent a peanut, but he finds the uses for peanuts. He finds uses for soybeans. He finds uses for potatoes. And like I said, he eventually, his experiments and his years of dedicated teaching at Tuskegee Institute, which was a college for freed slaves to educate themselves to become a formal part of society, really changed America's agricultural productivity. All right, let's take a second and talk about agriculture legislation. And legislation just means the laws that are being put into place. Beginning in the last half of the 19th century, government legislation led to a number of programs with that the purpose of this legislation was to aid American farmers. In 1862, the Department of Agriculture was established. Okay? They began to operate experimental farms. They're conducting research on plant and animal diseases, and they're developing new variety of crops. Again, the whole goal of the Department of Agriculture is to help and aid the farmers. All right. At some point, in 1889, we put into place the Secretary of Agriculture. He ultimately becomes a member of the president's cabinet, so he's one of the main guys the president goes to for aid and for help and for ideas. All right. 1887, Congress passes what's called the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act made available state funds to establish agriculture experimental stations. So the idea is that these states now have their own funds to continue these experiments, to continue to help farmers. Two more acts that we need to talk about: the Smith-Lever Act and the Smith-Hughes Act. In 1914, the Smith-Lever Act was adopted. It authorizes this setup of what's called an extension service within the Department of Agriculture. And basically it's this: a representative of this service, of this extension service, which is called a county agent, his whole goal, they're located in every different agricultural county, you have an agent. And the purpose of this, the extension service, is to keep farmers informed of current developments in agriculture. So as these experiments are happening, as this information is being found, you have these agents put into place whose goal is to keep these farmers informed. All right. For example, they now have on-spot training for certain things. And they're being able to be trained in their certain areas on what kind of seeds, what kind of fertilizer, under which circumstances are these things working. And that's the idea of this county agent under the Smith-Lever Act. Now, in 1917, Congress adopts this thing called the Smith-Hughes Act, which provides federal funds to help with high school finance courses, helps finance high school courses in agriculture. So things like 4-H, FFA, FHA, all of those things came from this Smith-Hughes Act. All right, here's your next 5 questions to answer. Again, these should come straight from the things we just covered. Hopefully you were keeping up with those in your notes. You have 5 blanks, Answer these 5 questions and then push play and come back for the rest of the assignment. Here's your homework, and it's the last page of your handout, so you have that. You're going to take these 4 people, Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, Booker T. Washington, and George Washington Carver. Google them, and you need to tell me when they lived, so when were they born, when did they die, where they lived, 5 important things they did, and how those things, just pick one of those things, how did they change history? All right, so Google these 4 people, answer those 4 questions about each person. All right, text me if you have any questions.